Almost anything in Maya can be animated. For example, we can animate the squash factor to cause the ball to squash and stretch alternately. I'll select the squash handle once again, go back to its inputs, and we can keyframe this factor. Let's set it to a pretty extreme value so we can really see the effect. On frame 24, I'll set it to a squash factor of negative 0.4. So that's really quite extreme, but it will look pretty good in the animation. It's going to go by pretty quickly. And to keyframe this, I don't want to use the S key, because S is going to actually keyframe all of these different channels. I only want to keyframe the factor. Select the name of the channel, in this case factor, and then go up to the Channels menu and choose Channels, Key Selected, right up at the top. And now only that channel is turning red. We didn't lock any of these, we just said we only want to keyframe that one channel. Now let's go forward a few frames. Let's go up to frame 28, 4 frames later. And we'll give this a positive factor, and that'll cause the ball to stretch in the opposite direction. I'll set that factor to 0.3. And I can keyframe this the same way. I can select the factor and go up to Channels, Key Selected. But I can also save time by using Auto Key. And that's this little skeleton key icon down here. When you turn that on, you enter a mode in which, when you change the value of a channel that already has keyframes on it, you will create additional keyframes. The prerequisite is, once again, you have to create at least one keyframe manually. Once you've done that, from now on, however, if you change the value of that channel in any way, you'll be creating a keyframe. And if you're parked on an existing keyframe, you will update and overwrite the old keyframe data. Okay, so I'll go a few frames later, 4 frames later, we'll go to frame 32. And I'll change the factor to a negative value. Let's give it a negative 0.2 and press Enter. And as soon as I do that, I see result 1 down here, meaning one keyframe's been created. And we can see a red line there on frame 32. All right, that's auto key. So I can go forward a few more frames. We'll go to frame 36. We'll set the factor to positive 0.1. Press Enter. We've got a new keyframe there. And finally, I'll go up to frame 40 and set the factor to 0 and press Enter. And now I've got an alternating squash and stretch effect. When I've finished, I have to remember to turn Auto Key back off again. If I don't, then I could accidentally create a lot of keyframe data that I don't want. All right, rewind, play that back, see what we get. We can maximize the camera view, tap the space bar. And we can see that it is oscillating. We are getting a squash and stretch effect here in this second half of the animation. As we play this back, we can see that there is an issue here, which is that the ball is already squashed to its full extent on frame 1. Let's go down to frame 1 and set the factor to 0 and key that. Select factor and key it. And if we play this, it's okay on frame 1, but then it starts squashing before we want it to. It's interpolating between frame 1 and frame 24. Now you might think that a good idea would be to move this keyframe down to frame 23 so that there was no transition there. But that could be problematic, especially if you end up scaling time and keyframes move around. I don't recommend that you do that. If you want a sudden transition between two keyframe values, instead of placing two keyframes next to each other, it's a better idea to change the interpolation type to hold that value until the next keyframe is achieved or reached. And in Maya, that's called a step tangent. My graph editor is still minimized here, so I can bring that back up again. And I've got the squash handle selected. And here is the factor curve. I can select that and press F to frame that. And we can see this is the interpolation here. We've got a squash factor of 0 on frame 1, squash factor of negative 0.4 on frame 24. And we want to just make that an instantaneous transition. To do that, select the first keyframe. And then up on the toolbar here, we can set that keyframe to use step tangents also known as a hold key. Click on that. And now, no matter where this keyframe is, it will hold that value until the next keyframe is reached, and then instantaneously jump to the new value. See what that looks like. All right, that's pretty good. One last thing we can do here is scale the curve. We can adjust the overall strength of that oscillating squash and stretch effect. Go back to the graph editor and select all these keyframes, and we can use the scale tool. Just the ordinary scale tool from the toolbox is fine. But the important thing with the way that scaling works for keyframes in Maya is it's very important where you place the mouse. The placement of the mouse cursor will be the center of the scale operation. If we want to scale this vertically and maintain its symmetry, we'll want to click on the 0 line here. And we also want to make sure that we're only scaling value and not time. To do that, hold down the Shift key and then click right on that 0 line with the middle mouse button and drag up and down. That's the weird thing. You have to use middle mouse. Left mouse doesn't work for the scale tool here. And as you can see, I'm scaling the entire effect up and down. If I clicked up here, for example, and did the same thing, hold down Shift and middle mouse drag up and down, I'll scale around that. That's not what I want in this case, so I'm going to undo that. Edit undo. So the position of the mouse cursor is very important here. All right, so I've just exaggerated that a little bit. Of course, I could edit this more, I could move those around, but you get the point now. Play that back. All right, and once we've scaled all that, we do want to adjust the position of the ball to make sure that it is actually touching the ground on frame 24. Tap the space bar, go out to the front view here. Select the ball, scroll to frame 24. Position that. We just want to move the ball down on frame 24. Let's go back to the graph editor. And it's Translate Y that we're concerned with. So click on Translate Y, press F to frame that. Select that key and use the Move tool. Once again, holding down Shift to edit that keyframe value and observe the results interactively in the viewport. Just make sure that's actually just touching the ground plane there. All right. Tap the space bar. Check our work. So the animation's looking pretty good, although it's a bit slow. We want to speed that up. We can do that by scaling all the keyframes for the entire scene at once. And we'll do that in the following movie. Let's go ahead and save this now. File, increment, and save.